Hello, this is the RPG Crawler, and welcome to another review. It's been a while since I looked at a decently sized main product, so in the interest of getting back into that, we're going to take a look at one that's been on my to-get list for some time. When it finally came out a bit ago, I could barely order it fast enough. I refer to Into the Borderlands from Goodman Games, the people behind the Dungeon Crawl Classics RPG. Now, Into the Borderlands is not, strictly speaking, new material. It's supposedly the first in a series called Original Adventures Reincarnated, which looks to make classic TSR-era modules and adventures available with historical context for 5th edition. As such, it was produced with special permission from Wizards of the Coast and includes commentary from Luke Gygax and Mike Mearls, among others. Into the Borderlands actually covers 2 modules, the classic B1 In Search of the Unknown by Mike Carr, and B2 The Keep on the Borderlands by Gary Gygax. Both of these are classics for a few reasons, not just limited to their historical positions. While they are not immune to criticism, both B1 and B2 classically possessed important elements necessary for both beginning dungeon masters and players to learn, as well as solid design elements that merit mention on their own. This book is pretty big, and it has a lot to cover, so I will break it down according to section, then try to give my own take on both the classic versions of the adventures, as well as the reworked versions. First of all, there's the physical quality of the book. It's a hardbound compilation sitting at over 380 pages, with a full-color cover, mostly black and white heavyweight interior pages, and then the rear of the book includes some glossy, full-color plates that give a look at the original cover art for the modules, as well as high-quality reproductions of the main maps. I'm no expert here by any means, but the binding is solid and seems perfect for a lay-flat style reference thing. While the text is fairly large and easy to read, it should be noted that in the reproductions of the modules themselves, they're taken directly from their original print appearances, and thus differ from the rest of the book in style and appearance. The text and maps in these modules appears as they were first printed, and the reproductions bear both the original page numbers, as well as a footer with the book title and page number within Into the Borderlands itself, which can be useful to reference within a module's reproduction, as well as within the book overall, since these modules have multiple versions of them within it. The contents of the book are collected into 12 chapters and 4 appendices. Chapter 1 is an introduction, and that has commentary on the modules by Luke Gygax, the son of Gary Gygax, and Mike Mearls, one of the lead designers of 5th edition. It also includes commentaries from Harley Stroh and Brendan LaSalle, who are associated with Goodman Games and Dungeon Crawl Classics, Alex Kammer, a collector of classic modules, and an interview with Mike Carr, the old product editor of the early TSR days, as well as the author of B1. The introduction material includes some interesting insights by people who are well versed in D&D lore, or who are directly related to the contents of the adventures within. It may not be useful to people who are just looking to run the game, but as somebody who's always had an interest in the history of role-playing games, I found that material quite useful. Chapter 2 includes not one, but 2 different printings of B1 In Search of the Unknown. These are page-for-page scans and reprints of the 2nd and 6th printings of the module, which may seem a little redundant, but they serve as good representations of how the module evolved over time. Most of the evolution occurred within the art and minor editorial issues, but it was interesting to note the changes overall. B1 is the first real pack-in module included with some of the early D&D box sets, although it was later replaced with B2. In Search of the Unknown includes guidelines for DMing the game in general, and some of the advice it offers is as relevant to this very day. In addition, as a sort of training module, B1 lacked entries for monsters and treasure throughout it. Rather, the map and the dungeon layout was presented, the rooms were keyed with non-treasure, non-monster contents, and then they just had spaces for you to add in your own stock. The module told a bit of the story of Rogan the Fearless and Zelagar the Unknown, and provided interesting descriptions and supernatural things to interact with throughout the caverns of Quasqueton. Then blank space, as I said, was provided for each room for the DM to use the rules detailed in the Dungeons & Dragons basic set to fill in the monsters and the treasure within. While this did provide ample opportunity for beginning DMs to flex their creative muscles, so to speak, it did also add a bit of prep work, which might have been a contributing factor to it being dropped as the pack-in module in later releases of the box set. Mike Carr himself was not, strictly speaking, a full-time gamer at the time, and his introduction on running the game actually benefits from that, as it includes some insights from someone that is not used to playing the game and running the game, and they cover some things that if you're used to it, you might miss out on. The design of the dungeon itself, while bereft of actual monsters, is also extremely well done. The layout provides many choice points and non-linear paths that a group can take different routes to move through the dungeon through, and the design couldn't focus on combat encounters, so instead it focuses on non-combat encounters and atmosphere. It's a module that's very much worth looking into if you're looking to improve those skills yourself. Indeed, while the design can be described as minimal in some instances, it's a very good example of how to tell a story without actually saying much, as many of the room descriptions can allow players to experience them and piece together what happened within Quasqueton without the typical narrative dump that you see in most modern modules, and that's an important skill to learn. While often overlooked, I personally do recommend B1 at the very least as something to study for any aspiring DM, even the older versions of it. As B1 is not stocked, Chapter 3 includes a number of alternate stocks that you can play directly in line with the dungeon. These examples are simply keyed to room numbers, and may be dropped in at a moment's notice. Each of the stock lists is designed by a different person, including one that is just dug up from that person's olden days, when one of the contributors actually ran it as a youth. This can give you a sense for how much the dungeon contents might differ depending on a particular DM's wishes. Chapter 4 covers B2, the Keep on the Borderlands, much in the same way. Again, it includes two representative printings, the second and the fourth. The Keep on the Borderlands was included as the pack-in module for the basic set for a considerable amount of time, and as it was written by Gary Gygax himself, it can be considered to be a fairly representative version of what the designer of the game might have considered a good tutorial module. Indeed, commentary by Luke Gygax in the introduction seems to indicate that Keep on the Borderlands preserved much of his father's tones in its writing. B1 itself includes the Keep, as well as encounters in the surrounding lands, and the Caves of Chaos, a dungeon complex distinctly different from that of Quasqueton. The module starts with an introduction to both running and playing the game, again filled with useful information for the first-time DM, including the importance of preparation, a lesson which I myself am still trying to learn 30 years later. The first section of the module includes a detailed, room-by-room accounting of the unnamed keep, its inhabitants, and the various services to be found within. While it may seem a little bit more detailed than modern adventures tend to go for, except on the smallest of scales, detailed home bases were very much a more useful thing back in the day, since characters could spend many more sessions around them. It's actually kind of a trend that I sort of miss. The next section of B2 includes some rules for exploring the wilderness immediately around the keep, including a few alternate encounter areas out in the wilds. While only a few in number, at least one of these encounters, the Mad Hermit, is a bit of a classic. After that is the Caves of Chaos Key, which includes fully stocked rooms of the interconnected caves around the outside of a secluded valley. This is the meat and bones of the dungeon, and multiple entrances and discrete sections of the Caves of Chaos make it something akin to a bunch of connected mini-dungeons, and they offer a very non-linear approach that encourages repeat exploration in a different manner than the Caverns of Quasquetzin. Like B1, B2 is remarkable as an introduction for how new DMs and players should play the game. It goes beyond the simple dungeon of B1 and shows the importance of having a home base detailed out, as well as touching on some of the outdoors exploration that is available in the game, although not in the same cross-country manner that you'd see in, say, Isle of Dread. In essence, it's a bit of a microcosm of everything you'd expect of a D&D game, from in-town interactions to quests, to wilderness, to dungeon exploration. The outdoors map includes a cave marked Cave of the Unknown, which is not directly referenced as the Caves of Quasquetzin, but B1 may well fit enough into the setting, and we'll get more into that later. B2 does have things worth criticizing about it. There's a focus on the hack and slash, and there's commentary that's been said out there about how the caves themselves might be seen as sort of a monster motel. One might say that the overall draw of supernatural chaos can justify the latter, not so much the former. Further, I can honestly say that the dungeon complex itself just isn't as good an introductory dungeon as B1 was. Sure, it brings combat to the forefront and provides many interesting challenges, but I honestly always thought it seemed more like a group of lairs than a proper dungeon. Although it does have a story behind it, it's just not as artfully shown as B1 was. Of course, lairs do have their place, and the ability to plug B1 directly in would go a long way towards including some of the more interesting parts of that dungeon in a game as well, and that is addressed in the next fully half of the book. Because Chapter 5 onwards consists of the 5th edition conversions and various expansions of B1 and B2. I'm going to be brief as I can be here because the changes in them are worth noting more than the actual conversions themselves. The conversions were done by Chris Doyle with additional support from Tim Wazinski. Both B1 and B2 have been converted separately, but both include alternate content designed to allow them to play into a single, seamless mini-campaign suited for new players with new characters, but also actually written well enough to be used by veterans. Chapter 5 compiles all of the advice for Dungeon Masters from both B1 and B2, keeping the wording and style much the same, while making it specifically applicable to 5th edition. The spirit of the advice is the same, and still incredibly useful, but the rewrites do recognize that the changes in the rules and the evolutions of the game have gone through have really changed some of the dynamics. It is a worthy read in and of itself. Chapter 6 is a rewrite of B1 in Search of the Unknown, and sets the tone for the rest of the book. The module retains all of the rooms and descriptions of the original, cleaned up and sometimes expanded and rewritten to modern standards. This includes the actual addition of boxed text, or in this case, italicized text. In this case, the writing is brief but well done, avoiding the unnecessary fluidity of certain boxed descriptions of years past. Another thing to note is that the dungeon is fully stocked, with creatures and treasures added as appropriate directly in line with the dungeon description. Some of the encounters have been linked together to provide a sound logic as to why certain creatures are in certain places. A few rooms have been changed, both to offer an optional entrance to the Cave of Chaos, but also additional encounter areas as well. Chapter 7 has these additional areas, covering both the Lonely Tower first mentioned, but not detailed in the original B1, as well as a couple additional sub-levels that get into more details regarding the eventual fates of Rogan and Zelagar. There's a little bit of an overarching plot that ties it to a character that was added or rather clarified in B2. The feel of these additional levels does in part preserve the original feel of the dungeon, although I think they're a bit more linear and somewhat more story involved, leaving them feeling like modern additions overall. However, they don't stand out that much, and their locations make some of the linear progression through those sublevels easy to forgive, as at that point, they're really just branches off of the main event. I think that they're fairly well written, and include at least one pretty solid surprise that I'd love to spring on my players. Even though this version of B2 is fully keyed, Chapter 8, the following one, has rules for restocking it, in case you're not satisfied with how it was stocked or want to go back and have the original experience. Unfortunately, the new format does mean that a DM will have to be very careful in extracting existing encounters and treasure from the text in order to replace them with whatever they restock. Chapter 9 introduces the keep on the Borderlands itself. Now, in the original B2, they didn't do much at all in terms of naming the keep nor its NPCs, leaving it open for the DM to use the module as they would. While presenting much of the same material, converted to 5th edition of course, this version does name some NPCs, although not the keep. It should be noted that Keep on the Borderlands actually received a bit of an update back in the AD&D 2nd edition days, in the form of Return to Keep on the Borderlands. While that itself was a decent and more in-depth module, almost none of the material presented is used in this conversion, with a precious few exceptions. This is understandable in a way, since Return was set a few decades after the original module, and thus NPCs can't be assumed to have changed. However, that doesn't excuse the place names that were changed, such as the inn's name. So alright, they didn't reference Return at all in the conversion, except they did, because a few names were carried over. And for a moment that confused me, so why would you use some but not all of the names from Return? And then, as I was flipping through, I turned towards some of the adventurers listed in Chapter 10, which is the adventurers outside of the keep proper, and it all fell into place. There's been some novelizations put out way back when about the various classical modules, basically turning them into proper fiction, and one by Rue Emerson was based on the keep on the Borderlands. This conversion apparently pays homage to that, referencing the few named NPCs listed in the novels, as well as the characters that form the main party in that book. It's interesting simply because that book took a few, but not all of the names from the Return module, meaning that technically, the novel is in canon with Return, but this conversion is only in canon with a novel and not actually Return. I spent entirely too much time figuring that out, and apparently entirely too much time explaining it. I've diverged a little bit here. Anyway, back to what I was saying. Chapter 10 covers encounters outside the keep, which includes the outdoors encounters from the original modules, but also a few new encounters. And Chapter 11 is a basic rewrite and conversion of the Caves of Chaos, which is accurate to the original module down to the last copper piece of treasure, with the exception of a cave that leads deeper. It was actually in the original module, and now it can serve as an optional secondary connection point to Quasquetin from the conversion of B1. Chapter 12 covers additional encounters, and much like the additional material added in B1, this includes fleshing out the optional tunnel that joins the two, as well as a couple additional caves and lairs not immediately evident in the canyon, but in their immediate general vicinity. All of these new areas use creatures that were not present in the original B2, but that still have a bit of an old school feel. Whether it feels like lairs and tunnels in the original B2 is debatable, because again they feel like additions designed during a later era, which they are, but not so much that they won't fit in during normal play. Finally, the appendices of the book include new magic items and spells, which are actually just conversions of some old school magic items to 5th edition, new monsters, which again includes mostly conversions of old monsters. I should note that a few of the creatures converted here are also included in later WotC products that had either just been or had yet to be released while these conversions were still in development, and a few that had also been converted to 5th edition by other third-party games like the Frog God Games 5th edition Foes, although the versions in this book conform to neither the official conversion nor any existing third-party conversions. All are relatively compatible in terms of threat level, so you can pretty much use whatever version you desire. Indeed, it seems that the versions included in this book are intentionally different, in order to simply provide something for a DM that has this book, but not necessarily Volo's Guide to Monsters or things like that. Appendix C covers some pre-made characters, hirelings, and followers, and includes mention of a hireling creator available on the Goodman Games site. Finally, Appendix D is the full-color plates of the cover art and the maps from the originals that I mentioned earlier. So this is a pretty hefty book for a relatively reasonable price. I personally find the reprints and the historical background and commentary fascinating, but for people who are just looking for a quick 5th edition conversion, they might be pointless. And although the reprints are very nice, the collector's value of them is somewhat dubious at best. It's not going to appeal to everyone on the basis of that alone. I'm glad that that was included, but if we just stopped there, I'm not sure that this is worth the price of admission. However, if we're looking at just the 5th edition versions of these two modules, I believe it's actually worth the cost on that alone. The conversions are extremely well done, and the joining material used to link them is virtually seamless. The additional material is nice enough as well, and between the two modules you have enough content to begin a campaign that will last for, honestly, I'd estimate a number of play sessions equal to what you'd find in most WotC hardbacks. Although I do have some mild concern over the level range supported. The way some of the monsters were scaled in 5th edition means that they should provide a challenge to characters well past the original 3 levels of the source modules, but in terms of high-end content, you might be lacking. I think that Goodman Games does deserve some praise for not only bringing these classic modules back into playable condition, but for expanding on them in a manner that respects the original source material. I am pleased with both the physical quality and the quality of the writing within Into the Borderlands. I would recommend this not only to people who are on a nostalgia kick like I was, but honestly and truly to newer dungeon masters as well, especially those who are unsure whether they're up for the task of presenting their entire new game world or running one of the WotC hardbacks. In my opinion, this Into the Borderlands marks right up there with the 5th edition starter set in terms of preparing a novice GM to run the game. Between its classic hints and explanations, and well-documented module content. Longtime players will of course get a fantastic conversion of a set of classic adventures. I do note that this is supposed to be only the first in an entire series of such conversions, and after having seen how well this one came out, I'm genuinely looking forward to getting and playing whatever they decide to convert next. For those interested in obtaining it, I will put links in the description below where you can purchase it as always. This has been the RPG Crawler with my review of Into the Borderlands. If you like what you've seen, remember to leave a like, comment if you've got any feedback, and subscribe for more RPG content, both tabletop and computer. If you're feeling particularly generous, I do have a Patreon at patreon.com/rpgcrawler that goes towards supporting the channel. Until next time, take care and goodbye.